Everything looked great on the outside probably or looked great on paper, and I just felt dead inside, to be honest, completely dead.
What did that feel like to snap out of that?
I had to leave where I was because to get clarity on what I needed to do, it's like climbing a mountain. You have to get to a different vantage point to see your path. You can't do it just by going through the motions and continuing on the path that you're on, Americans, but also just as humans. That drive to feel like we don't have worth or value unless we're producing things or earning is wrong. At the end of the game, kings and pawns go back to the same box.
Think society. I think the world is in a messy middle right now.
Mhm.
And this weird liminal space where we've kind of left the world that we knew and we haven't fully entered the future world, right? We're just in this in between.
Mhm.
Things feel weird. While we are in this liminal space, what do you think society needs more of?
I think a lot of people are going to go through an identity crisis. Power of the human brain far exceeds what AI is capable of based on energy usage. So the
Mm.
human brain is capable of more, of doing more, and has a greater output with far less input. What is the actual cost? What is this actually going to cost us as society?
We talk about clarity as if it's this beautiful aha moment and oh I just
Mhm.
knew and I'm just I'm following my passion and I realized I'm a social entrepreneur. I realized it can just kind of sound beautiful and magical and oh we want to do the work that lights us up, but it's also very messy. It comes with grief sometimes and realizing that
Oh,
maybe
yeah.
the path that you
Yeah.
chose you've outgrown, or maybe that's not who you are anymore. Maybe the person who chose that path 10 years ago is not the same person today,
Yeah.
right?
It's very strange to, like, try to describe it, but it's like you're putting that part of yourself or that version of yourself away. You're putting it away. Maybe you'll need it again later in life. Maybe you'll be different later in life and be like, "Oh, I could go back to this work environment, and it would be very different." I don't know, but maybe never, and that's okay, but I did feel in, like, some kind of sense like a process or form of grief, but not really in a bad way, more like it was more like I was sad that I settled for that
Mm.
and tolerated it. So I feel like I bought into a lie that the harder you work, the more productive or successful you'll be, and I think that's a lie. I think that's a lie. I think the 9 to 5 concept needs to die.
Ari Lester,
Good
welcome to Lucid
morning.
Commons.
Thank you for having me. I'm honored to be
Yeah.
your first guest. I'm so excited for you. Congratulations.
Thank you. We've been talking about this in our creative pursuits and endeavors for quite some time. So I'm
Yes.
excited to finally be launching it and to have you as my first guest. So thank you for being here.
Thank you. Me
Yeah,
too.
Ari, who is Ari Lester?
It's a good question. I would say that the typical American answer would be I'm an attorney by trade. We always talk about our profession, but I'm a wife, I'm a cat mom, and recently turned social entrepreneur. I have started venturing into more creative roads. I started like a period of exploration last year into launching businesses. And now, currently, I'm really focused on what does having a business of my own and making a meaningful impact on society look like for me.
Okay. All right. I love that. I want to latch on to social entrepreneur for a second. Like, that's interesting. I don't know that I've heard that. Can you unpack that and tell
Yeah,
me
I would love to.
what that means?
Yeah, so as you know, since we've been getting to know each other over the last few years, so I left a career in big law a couple years ago. I spent about a year in the nonprofit space, and then I stepped out towards the end of last year, relating to family matters, just things that I thought were more important and needed to take priority in my life. And I started doing some identity and values unpacking at a women's retreat in Miami last August. And from the work that we did, I gained a lot of clarity. I was thinking about what my values are. Why did I choose my career path in the first place? And when we sat down to actually write this out, there was a big distinction between why I chose the career, how I felt about it, and what my personal values were and what I wanted to do. And there was a bit of misalignment there. And so for some reason, I'd never gone through that thought process until I actually sat down to write it out. And it wasn't that my values or motives and, choosing the legal career were bad or purely motivated by, a position that was lucrative. It was
Mhm.
just they weren't matching where I currently was at in life, right? Because people change, your values change, your priorities change. And so social entrepreneurship is basically a hybrid form of somebody who values work in nonprofit space, and you obviously still want to have income, but you're doing something that it's values motivated and it's for the benefit of society. It's not just about profit margins. It's not just about revenue or your bottom line. You're doing something that's good for other people. There are different versions of that, but like one example would be Tom's. If you're familiar with the
Mhm,
brand Tom's, they
mhm,
do like natural personal care products. They donate a lot and do a lot of environmental work. And so that's something that I'm thinking about doing in my own way, not in creating a product, but just in having a business that operates in that same way. I care a lot about social impact. That's probably my motivating and driving force now for anything that I do that's, business or career related.
mhm.
But I wanna spend a little bit more time thinking about, what are the offerings of that business? Who would I partner with? And goal setting. So, one of the other things I've worked on in the past at professional retreats and at women's workshops where you go through your own business plan. It's not just about setting goals, right? It's why are the goals important to you and why do they matter? Which it sounds really counterintuitive, like you would think it would be obvious, but it's not. So, I'm trying to spend a little bit more time on that. Like, what are the goals that I want to accomplish and why do I care about them?
Mhm.
And so I'm still working through that right now, but I'm hoping to launch in the next month or two. So I'm very excited.
Yeah, that's very exciting. Okay, I want to dwell there for a second and unpack that and just start with why do you think are we stuck on autopilot? Like what is happening to I would say brilliant, self-aware people such as yourself that want to have such a positive impact in the world? What is happening to society writ large
Uh-huh.
that
There's
is
definitely a trend.
right? I mean, so I would say was did you have a specific moment of clarity that you can actually pinpoint, or at what point did you notice that I may have made some decisions that have led me
Uh-huh.
to this place where I feel such a deep sense of like values misalignment that you had to actually do something about it and take action?
Yeah. So I'll talk about when I was working in big law. When you are getting towards your mid-level stage working as an attorney, right? Everybody always considers you to be on partnership track, right? That's the goal. You think about, can I make partner between my 8th and 10th year of practice? You start having conversations, you have mentors, and different people, and you think about what you want your practice to look like. And I think between my 5th and my 6th year, and I'd had some conversations with a few people, and it's like everything looked great on the outside probably or looked great on paper, and I just felt dead inside, to be honest, completely dead. Like, I had a great salary, I had a beautiful Lakeview office, I valeted my car every day, all these great things that they sound great, they look great, whatever, but I was, like, literally there was no fire burning inside, I was not motivated, and I felt like even if my work was having a meaningful impact for clients, right? It was doing something positive for them, like saving them money, helping them be compliant, whatever, helping with their day-to-day business operations. For me, I don't it's like the fire had burned out. And I would say for those of us working in healthcare law or in health law, I started my career right before the pandemic. And so maybe for me, it was spending, 3+ years in a really crazy, chaotic day to day change. It was exciting at first, but then over time became complicated. And when the pandemic ended, then everyone's focus shifted mostly towards, compliance, audit preparedness. A lot of the federal government agencies were starting to do investigations and different things. So It was just a lot of upheaval. Like, for me, I didn't get a sense of stability or a clear trajectory because it was like uncharted territories. Like, even the partners were like, we've never been through anything like this. So there's good and bad. Like, good when you're a lawyer working at a big law firm because you probably have a lot of stable work, including in transactional work. But I don't know. It was just like I couldn't see myself doing it into the partnership realm. And I was like, I don't think this is what I want for myself. I heard a lot of comments from other people that worked at different places that were like, I regretted it. Or, I didn't take care of my health and then had a health crisis. Or I was trying to schedule 40 minutes in at night to see my kids. And I
Uh,
was like, that's really, or, I haven't seen my family members for years that live in other states. It's just so hearing those repeated examples was like, I don't think I want this for myself. This seems like not a great direction. So I gave myself some time to think about it. I wanted to be patient to see if I would change my mind. I liked the work that I did, but I was like, is this making a meaningful impact? Is this the legacy and the impact that I want to make in the work that I do? And so I felt like a little bit misaligned. I didn't see a clear end point or like place in the future that I was trying to get to, if that makes
okay.
sense. It
Yeah,
was it was
that makes
unclear.
wow, okay. So that's I feel like that's a huge moment that not a lot of people actually have. Or if they have it, maybe they can't find the courage to actually act on it, or they don't know how, or the first step that they could even take, or even the next best step, right?
Yeah.
During those months that you were thinking about it and doing all this reflecting, what did that actually look like? Like, what are you someone who journals? Were you using tools? Were you using coaches? Like, what resources helped you get through that messy middle where you were kind of having this realization, knowing in your heart that you needed to act on it, right? But taking that time to just reflect, what did that actually look like for you?
Yeah, I would say all of the above. I was doing everything. I really was trying to be patient and give myself the time to think through it. So I spent time talking to mentors, people in my practice group, people in adjacent practice groups that we did, cross department work with, older associates, feedback from attorneys that worked in other fields or other types of specialties, talked to family. And then I also spent time looking on the internet at people who had made that change themselves for different reasons. Maybe they lived in different states or even different countries. But I felt like a lot of the same feelings were there. There was a consistency. And this was for men and women at different stages of their life, different family structures, everything. There were just a lot of consistent patterns and things that I heard from people where I think the bottom line was it wasn't enough. It didn't feel like enough. It's not filling my cup. It's not feeling like I'm doing something that is making a difference or matters.
Mm,
If the most excitement I have is collecting my paycheck and spending it, it's time for me personally, it's time to move on.
okay. Is that,
And I like spending my paycheck, don't get me wrong.
I mean, yeah, that's like the most honest thing to say. Like, I mean, no, truly. What I'm wondering is, were you even, I recently learned about myself that I'm somebody that can't be content. I have to be on fire every single day doing the work that I want to be doing. And I'm wondering if in going through this experience, if you saw something similar in yourself, were you even content doing the work that you were doing? Like you could have
I
kept on
was.
going through
I
the
was,
motions?
but
Okay.
that's not enough for me. I'm the same
Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
And I'm not like trying to convince anybody that, that's how they should be feeling. But I think the statistics that I looked at, now, obviously for me, I made that transition 2 years ago at the end of the summer. And last year, left an in house full time role in the nonprofit space. And it wasn't that that job wasn't enough for me either. It's just that I had to make changes, right, due to family priorities. Like that always is going to have to come first because that's just the reality of your life. Those things aren't planned or predictable. So you just adapt. I'm very adaptable. So I will give myself some credit for that. I'm very adaptable. And obviously, if you make it through law school and the bar exam and you make it into a big law arena, you're obviously a very hard worker and self-disciplined and adaptable probably, but I think you have to have that motivating factor, or you're
Mhm.
gonna have the burnout experience in some way at some point. And the statistics from last year were that I think about half of all new business owners were women. So all half of all the founders last year that started new businesses, which includes myself, were women, which is really exciting. And so a lot of contributing factors there, right? We can speculate why that would be. I think the return to office mandate was a big one for a lot of different reasons. That for me was a non-negotiable. When I left Big Law, that was not a hardline policy, but it was being talked about. So what I've noticed about myself too in making career changes over the years is that I have a hypersensitivity to those things if they're non-negotiables for me. If I feel like a company is going to change a policy and it's going to be a hard line and it's not something I can live with, I'll leave before that becomes an issue. I don't want to wait around for that. I will leave and make that decision beforehand. And that ended up happening, right? We've heard about that, and that's been the remote work and flexibility has been clawed back a lot. So for me, that's too important. Autonomy is important. As you know, I'm self-professedly not a morning person, and that's because I'm biologically wired to wake up after 8:30 a.m. When you have
Mhm.
office obligations and a long commute, that just does not work. There can be detrimental health effects by trying to force yourself into that schedule. So,
Yeah. I want to talk to you more about these non-negotiables for you.
mhm,
Do you think having learning what your non-negotiables are led you to starting your own consulting company and being self-employed? Can you talk a little
mhm,
bit about that experience and making, I mean, that's a big decision to make, to
yeah,
decide to be self-employed, right?
mhm,
And a lot of women, like you said, are doing it mainly for the flexibility. So I want to hear more about kind of the reflection that you did and the conclusions that you came to in terms of more about your non-negotiables. I know you said autonomy and the flexibility. We've talked about the social impact. What else do you think drove you to decide that self-employment was the path for you and is the path for you moving forward?
yeah, so I would say for myself, and I've been this way for a long time, probably since I was young, but even as a teenager and in my 20s. So if you're a creative person and you're an innovator and you are somebody who always wants to improve things and change things and you question the status quo, which I've done in probably every job I've had, that becomes right. That causes social friction. Some people appreciate that and want that and will encourage that. But and I think in certain work environments and especially in the legal field and, doing work for corporate clients, there's a lot more hierarchy and rigidity. Things take longer. For people like us, if we want to be change makers, we get restless and impatient. If we see things that we feel like are mediocre, or like if standards aren't fair across the board in different ways that we think, right, are appropriate, you're not going to be satisfied with that. So I would say non-negotiables would have to be for me, like, yeah, having autonomy over the work that I do, my schedule, but then also it's like the type of work that I do. So I don't want to be personally, like, there were a lot of lawyers I talked to who they wanted to find a niche. They wanted to, get better and better at what they did over time and be like the expert in one specific thing. If you're a polymath and you have 10 different interests or you want to do interdisciplinary work because that feels more important to you, like I feel that way, I don't want to do that. That would make me feel like pigeonholed or trapped. I want to have flexibility and I don't want to do the same type of work over and over and over and over. And I actually remember talking to a colleague when I was a third or fourth year associate and they did transactional work in a specific area. And I asked them, like, what is your goal? They were maybe like 3 or 4 years away from probably being partner, like, what is your goal? What is your sense of feeling like you made it or like what you're working towards? And that person replied, I feel like I've made it. I make good money and I have stable work and I can provide for my family. Not that that's dishonorable. That's a valid point. It's very practical.
Mhm.
That's just not the world I can live in. I just can't. That feels getting too monotonous and too, I don't know. That actually scares me. Maybe that's bad that I feel that way. I don't know, but that I've always been like that. My tolerance for work like that will like time out at like 2 to 3 years. I don't
Mm,
think I could. Yeah.
mhm.
I don't
It
know. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, also I can speak to the generalist versus specialist perspective because that's what I'm learning about myself, right? I also appreciate interdisciplinary work, going from my nursing background to law. I wanted to be able to use my clinical brain and my legal brain in my work. And I found that I wasn't able to do that. And I think my patience is not as long as your pa is not as good as your patience, right? You said 2 to 3 years. For me, once I've tasted that work and I have been lit up and excited and working on something that quite literally makes me jump out of bed in the morning, I
Mhm.
mean, what more could you want out of a job,
Right.
out of a career,
Uh-huh.
right? And only having that experience a handful of times in my legal career so far, I think I just wanted to get to a place where I could do that every single day, right? I
Mhm.
mean, once you've had it and you know what it is, you just want more of that. And
Yeah.
it makes me think, I heard someone say recently that law can be a job, it can be a career, or it can be a vocation. And it's okay that it's something different for every person, right? It's allowed to be all three
Right.
of those. I think it's just a matter of doing the self reflection to understand what it means to you, right? Is law just a job? And is that okay for right now? Do you derive meaning from other places in your life?
Mhm.
That's okay. That path is okay, right? Is it a career? Do you still work hard at it? Are you trying to climb the career ladder? Not just for the sake of climbing the career ladder, but because you like the work, right? It's okay to like the work, to be a specialist, to have a niche. Or is it a vocation? Do you wake up every day and you are doing the Lord's work and you are aligned and you are on fire, right? It is
Some
some
days I
days.
felt like that, but
Yeah.
yeah, I feel like being a
Yeah.
lawyer is one part of my life. It can't be
Yeah.
my whole life, and I think as you observe people and talk to people, some people make it their entire life and their identity, and I personally think that's dangerous long term, and I feel like there are other parts of yourself that need to be developed. Like, I strongly believe in self-actualization, and I think if you make one thing your entire life and your whole career, I just think that inevitably there will be other things that maybe suffer or don't get as much attention as they should, and that could be different for everybody.
Yeah.
Just my opinion.
I want to hang on to self actualization for a minute. Can you talk about that? I know where that word comes from, right? Because I've been trained in
Right?
it, but I want you to talk about what self actualization means to you. And are you there right now? Are you on your way there?
Yeah. It's a
Yeah.
good topic. I like it. So I think for me, yeah, being a neurodivergent person and overanalyzing, that's definitely a superpower. You can get stuck.
Hmm.
You can overanalyze everything and go down rabbit holes, which honestly is sometimes fun,
Hmm.
especially if that's the work that you do and you get to do that on your own. But self-actualization from my perspective and the way that I feel about it, I think is important. I feel like that's something that you should do. You have all those different parts of yourself, right? Spiritual, mental, emotional, whatever you're doing for your trade for a living. And then even beyond that, I think everybody can feel about that differently, and then also emotional intelligence, I feel like is an important piece of that sometimes kind of gets forgotten about. We grow up thinking so much about test performance and IQ, but EQ is a huge part of it that I think needs more attention to. And so I think that's a constant work in progress. I feel like I'm getting there. I feel like I'm at a point where I'm very close to putting all the pieces together of my values, the work that I like to do, what's important. And then I will always joke and say in recent conversations I've had with others, I feel like I had a quarter life crisis at 25 and a spiritual awakening at 35. I'm still going through the spiritual awakening, which is not just in a religious sense, but in a broader sense of how you're connected to everybody and your calling in life. What are you here to do? What are your gifts and abilities? And are you using all of them in the best way or to the fullest extent that you can? And of
Hmm.
course, sometimes those things take really, years to develop. Or maybe you won't find out until later in life. But I don't want to like take this to a sad or morbid place. But as somebody who subscribes to stoicism,
Hmm.
I have spent intentionally a lot of time not just doing introspection, but also thinking about um, radical acceptance of your mortality. I think a lot of people are in denial about none of us knows how much time we have left on earth unless, we receive tragically some kind of terminal diagnosis or something that's beyond our control. But we should think about the impact and legacy we're going to leave. And there's an Italian proverb that I love that I like to tell people if you haven't heard it. And it's at the end of the game, kings and pawns go back to the same box. We can't take things with us. So the only thing that really matters is the impact and what we do for other people. And so
Wow.
for me, that has to be measurable. That has to be measurable, not just in, the money that you're earning. It has to be measurable. Yeah, the self-actualization is in process definitely, but I don't know. It's a journey and I like the journey and that's fine. I don't know when I'll get there and maybe certain parts of the self-actualization happen at different times. But the other thing is I wish I had read, I don't know if you've read or heard about that, but they talk about the regrets of the dying. That should be required reading for high school age students. I wish I had read that when I was younger, and I think a lot of people should read it when they're younger and think about it. What are the
Mhm.
things that really matter? How are you investing your time?
I love that. I'm writing that down.
Yeah.
I wanna still stay here with self-actualization because I went to this, the Weatherhead Leadership Conference, and there was a presenter who was talking about this concept. We watched a short 3-minute video on this about being above the line or below the line. And to
Yes.
me, yes, have you seen that?
I think that's a is that a Brené Brown thing? I don't know where it
Like,
comes from, but she
I know.
has shared that too.
I think she has shared that. I don't know who developed the framework or this video, but
Yeah.
what it made me think of in the moment was like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? And self-actualization being at the top,
Huh?
and how a lot of people in the world can't even meet the most very basic needs sometimes of food, clothing, water, housing, a stable income. And that doesn't necessarily have to look like, below the poverty line, at the poverty line. It can look like people who live paycheck to paycheck. It can
Uh-huh.
look like people who are in such a state of stress, chronic stress, or living in survival mode that they can't ever even make it above the line, right?
Yeah.
They can't even ascend to self-actualization or even create the mental space and bandwidth to think about that, to get there, because they're just trying to get through every single day, right? And it made me think of my own experience, over the past few months because on paper, talking about having the perfect career on paper and the nice paycheck and, everything looks great on the outside, right? But I felt like I was in such a state of survival mode
Uh-huh.
every single day, just trying to make it through the day. And it wasn't until I had a moment of stillness, and honestly, this could have even been the moment that Lucid Commons was born as an idea, but the sound bath class
Mhm.
that we went to together,
Yeah.
I can't I literally just can't tell you, like, what that did for me. I hadn't had a moment of stillness like that in so long.
Uh,
It was truly, I mean, like, it was so transformative, and it
that's
made me
great.
realize it truly, I mean, and it made me realize
I
how
love that.
important it is to just
Mhm.
pause
Make
and
time for that.
breathe and to make time for that and to just be still, to
Yep.
stop going through the motions, to and regardless of how you ended up in survival mode, right? If you're in survival mode, your head is down, you're working, you're just going through the motions of every day, trying to get through every day, get home, do everything you need to do at home, after work, get to sleep, and just wake up and do it all over again. No matter
Mhm.
how you got there, I think people who are stuck in survival mode have a really hard time being able to get to this place that we're even talking about, right? Self actualization and realizing what your calling is in life, what you're supposed to do in life. So, what I want to ask you is if you've ever found yourself in this state of survival mode where you find it really hard to even summon the cognitive capacity to get above the line before you can
Yeah.
even start ascending to this like level of self-actualization, right? And what did that feel like to snap out of that? I guess A, to exist in that, and
Mhm.
then to slowly, if it happened gradually or if it happened, suddenly, what it was like to snap out of that.
Yeah. I don't know. This is a good question. I think, I mean, I'll always get existential in conversations about anything, but I think there's different things that happen. For me, as a person of faith, as a Christian, I pray a lot. I ask for wisdom and discernment. Sometimes when you're emotional, it's hard to like sift through the heaviness of your emotions or like fatigue if you're just tired, but I pray. And then sometimes you get moments of clarity where, it's almost like you remember, I don't have to feel this way. I can just stop what I'm doing and go outside and sit in the sun for 5 minutes or, you know, put headphones on and listen to music. Like take a break, walk around, do anything to like break up the time when you feel that heaviness or you feel overwhelmed about what's going on in your life. So I've done that, right? That's like making some kind of physical change from your environment, but more importantly, I don't know, I think honestly it's a lot of what you're personally willing to tolerate. Everybody has different tolerance levels, but also again, and this is kind of deep because you're getting into the emotional angle of it. I heard somebody who spoke at a leadership conference recently about compassion and like how we have compassion for others and then also, do we have self-compassion for ourselves? Like if you have compassion for other people, why is it so hard to have self-compassion? And we went through this whole exercise where we talked about what does compassion look like when we do that for other people, right? Spend time with them. You might buy them a gift or send them a message to cheer them up and things like that. And we think about the scenarios in which that's needed. But then for ourselves, are we doing that for ourselves? You can't always rely on other people to do that for you because they're not going to know your thoughts and your feelings. But are we doing those things for ourselves? Are we giving ourselves a break? Are we treating ourselves with grace if we made a mistake or, whatever, didn't do the best job we could on something because we got 3 hours of sleep the night before? And so I think self compassion is part of that too. And I don't think everybody knows how to do that. That's also something that kind of requires some learning and
Mm.
practice.
It does. It does. How have you learned to give yourself compassion? Are you still practicing? Like what things do you do
Yeah.
every day or what mindset shift did you make? What actual activities do you do to practice self-compassion?
I think journaling is one for me. Doing things like sound therapy, I think, are really important for me. And then it could even just be anything like reading for fun. I think coming from like if you have like a high achieving family or if you're a high achieving academic, when you were younger, your whole life growing up. And I've noticed this about myself when you like to be busy, when you're restless, when you feel good because you're accomplishing something or doing something that you like. I noticed a pattern in myself, honestly, probably since high school through college and all my jobs where I literally went from thing to thing to thing to thing with no break. No break, no rest, no chance to like stop and reflect about what was next for me. I was so busy goal setting and just thinking about the next thing that I wasn't even enjoying where I was. And so for me, stepping out of my job last year to spend more time with family, to focus on health, and to think about like what are all the creative gifts that I've had or that I would like to use that I haven't had the chance to use for a long time.
Mhm.
This has been like this period of my life. It's liminal, right? It's uncertain. It's unpredictable. There's no like plan or guidebook that's going to tell you how to do it or where you're going to end up. But for me, that's actually exciting. Right, it's exciting and it's comforting because you get to explore, you get to experiment, you get to be creative, you get to meet new people, and so this process for me, giving myself the time and not rushing myself, having grace it's been an act of self-compassion for me.
Hmm.
So, I'm getting a lot out of it, and it's like
Yeah.
I'm trying not to rush what I'm doing or pressure myself to get things done by a certain time.
Yeah, I'm there. So I'm in that deliberate pause right now. And I'm trying to be very cognizant of the fact that it's almost like a motor that's inside of you that's just like, okay, we have to keep going. What's next? What are we going to do next? And I mean, I'd like to say that I'm learning how to rest and how to just be at home. And I'm taking a caregiving break to be at home with my daughter, right? For the next few months. But I'd be lying if I said there wasn't just this motor inside of me and just my thought process is, what can I be doing right now? I have to be doing something, surely, right? And I mean, here I am starting a podcast, right?
Mhm.
Even though I've been wanting to do this creative project for a long time, maybe now I feel like I have the cognitive bandwidth to actually do it, to actually execute and not just think about it, right?
Yeah.
But I'm in that space right now. So, what would you say to anybody who wants to take a deliberate pause, right? No matter what that looks like, it doesn't have to be leaving a career, right? Resigning from
Mhm.
a job. If it's even taking a 1 week staycation at home, right?
Mhm.
Or mental health leave, right? Whatever that might look like, to just press pause for a minute on life. What would you tell people to do during that time?
I've told people to do this in different ways before. It's so funny because after I went through this process, I've had different people and completely different life scenarios and jobs come to me and ask for advice and ask about what they should do. And one person that I talked to, she was actually studying for the LSAT, having a tough time. I think she was like moving her house or had some other things going on. There was a lot of chaos. And I said, take a week off. You don't have to tell your job why. Personal, go somewhere if you want to take a trip or just stay home. Do nothing or just, do creative stuff all week, like paint or go sightseeing. Just I think the importance of stepping out of the routine and the monotony is also good for, creative drive, right? Having when you're in a liminal space, whether it's a week, a month, a year, the liminal space, I've done a lot of reading on this, and a lot of the most success and people who feel fulfilled, just in general, had that after a liminal time. They had a breakthrough, they started their company, they published a best-selling book. It was some kind of major transformation that came from stepping out of the routine, making a conscious decision to take a break. And another person I talked to was like, she's also a mother of a few children. She and her work structure is a little bit non-traditional as well. She was like, I'm like running on fumes. I can't do this, whatever. And she was like, I'm just going to start taking Fridays off. So it's like, do that. Take Fridays off if you have PTO or take, a half a day, whatever it is that you need, or do something on Saturdays. If you have weekend time, go somewhere new every weekend. Force yourself out of your comfort zone. I think that's part of it too. You have to get out of your comfort zone. Yeah, it's hard to reset the routines and habits, but I think that's also part of it. That disruption can be very rewarding.
Mhm. Yeah, I don't know if you've ever gone on a vacation. Uh, this just talking about this like need to be doing something and getting stuck in this productivity mode. My husband and I went on vacation to Punta Cana, I think for like 5 or 6 days during law school, and we couldn't just lay on the beach, right? There's people that can just go lay on the beach and they can read a book. And I brought a couple books, right? And I tried to be that person that sat on the beach and I had a book and I tried to read it and I just couldn't. Like I couldn't sit there and
Mhm.
sit still and be with myself and read and focus. And I think we lasted like all of 2 hours on the days that we tried to go to the beach, right? Before we had to get up and go do something. Oh, let's go do an excursion. Let's go on a catamaran. Let's go. And it wasn't until literally like the third or fourth day that we just went and laid by the pool, and I think we lasted about, like, 5 hours where we're like, "Okay, we can just
Mhm.
lay and be still," and it's so hard to teach your body and your nervous system how to
Yes.
unwind. How do you practice moments of stillness? A, have you experienced that realization where you're like, "Oh my god, like, it's almost compulsive. I have to be doing something right now. I can't just sit still."
Mhm.
And how do you do the hard work of practicing teaching your nervous system, like, "Hey, it's okay to just be still right now."
Yeah. Okay. So I love this. So this is one of my favorite topics that's, part of the conversation we've been having about life.
Mhm.
And I'll try my best to give I have a layered answer. So first, right, as a Christian, from a religious perspective, I think there's something really powerful about honoring the Sabbath, whether you do that on Saturday or Sunday, but there's a biological factor. And this is what I love about, if you're somebody who subscribes to scriptural teachings or, having a holy day or a day of rest, that is actually biologically very important for your body, right? Because of DNA repair. Maybe you fast because, autophagy is really good for your body. That prevents cancer. There's a lot to be said about allowing your body to rest or even just getting a full night of sleep on a regular basis. That's why it's important. So, I think our culture, for whatever reason, has developed warped identity around being busy and being productive. And I also, that's part of like what I would love to write more about, on Substack or in my consulting work with businesses is allowing your employees to honor that in whichever way is good for them. If you're a neurodivergent person, your work comes in bursts. You cannot work a standard regular schedule every single day like a lot of other people can. And I'm going to say this, and this is dorky, but I think we underestimated the mitochondria being the powerhouse of the cell and learning that in school because it is the most it's so nerdy, but it is the most true thing. And if you understand and appreciate like the science behind that, you know, I love everything that's in the Bible that is scientifically supported because there's a good reason, but you have to unpack it. Unfortunately, it doesn't always explain it very well, right? But like that's why it's important. And so for me, it has been doing things like a sound bath. That was actually I took health leave from my job a couple years ago after I was diagnosed with ADHD and celiac disease around the same time because I could not figure out why I was so tired or why I had brain fog or there were other things going on. And it took a long time. It was like an 8-month period from start to finish of trying to like diagnose that and understand it. And when I took leave and came back from that, I think the thing that stands out the most from when I took that leave, right, just for purely for rest. I was going to doctor's appointments, I was going to like talk therapy and whatever, trying to like overhaul my diet because it is a big change. My biggest takeaway was the first 3 days of that leave, I was like, I don't know how to rest. I don't know how to let myself rest. I and this is sad. I think this is also a spiritual thing, not just a mental, emotional thing. Americans, but also just as humans, that drive to feel like we don't have worth or value unless we're producing things or earning is wrong. I think that's a lie. Everybody has value and worth. You don't have to be working. You don't have to work a 12 to 16-hour day. You don't have to make a lot of money. Everybody has worth and value, and our bodies they're not eternal. We have to take care of our bodies because that damage, that fatigue, everything is cumulative. And I think that's really important for people to remember. We have to let ourselves rest. And if you have to schedule it, schedule it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's I've been there and I think I'm still learning how to be, right? We're always my therapist says this, I'm always human doing and never human being, right?
Yeah.
How
Just
about
be.
how about just be, right? That and that should be enough, right? And
Huh?
you have to, like we were talking about self-compassion earlier, you have to practice just being
Mhm.
and honoring that and respecting that and loving those parts of yourself and those parts of life that aren't always doing something or producing something, making something, moving towards something, but there's so much value in just I want to circle back to this word because you've said it a couple times and I love it too. I actually just learned it a couple months ago, but liminality,
Yeah.
right? So I think, not only were you kind of in this liminal space, I'm in a liminal space right now. I
Mhm.
think colloquially we can call it the messy middle, right? The
Mhm.
fancy word is liminality. I like to call it the messy middle. But I think society, I think the world is in a messy middle right now. We're in
Oh,
this
yeah.
weird liminal space where so much is uncertain, right? We
Yes.
and as positive as I generally am as a person and optimistic, right, about the
Mhm.
future and as exciting as AI is and all the possibilities that it's going to unlock, I think deep down, and I think humanity feels this, I think a lot of people feel an existential threat,
Mhm.
right? And this weird liminal space where we've kind of left the world that we knew and we haven't fully entered the future world, right? We're just in this in between.
Mhm.
Things feel weird. And I am just wondering, yeah, go.
I
Yeah.
feel it too. I think everybody does, regardless of how it's affected people's jobs. But go ahead. I don't wanna cut you
Yeah,
off.
yeah. I just making this observation and just extrapolating like yes, like we are having this very personal experience of going through a liminal space in our lives and that is messy and it's hard, right? And to do that collectively as a society, I guess I'm just wondering from your perspective, while we are in this liminal space, what do you think society needs more of, right? You know, you are entering this phase of your life where you are a social entrepreneur and you want to make an impact and you want to help other people. What would you say society needs more of while we're going through this messy middle together?
Yeah, I think it's such a difficult question, but I would say there's probably a few things, but it probably stems from exactly what we were just talking about. I think a lot of people are going to go through an identity crisis and maybe even a mental health crisis because people unfortunately develop their whole identity and self-worth around their job or how much they're earning or whatever, right? I think they worry about social humiliation and embarrassment of getting laid off or getting fired or whatever happens because the AI changes are real and they're happening all the time. I would say that people need to take the time to think about and reset, what their identity is. Think about your identity as a person completely separately from your job. I know that mental health professionals and counselors are going to be in huge demand. That's already been forecasted for a few years, even before like this whole advent of job displacement was very apparent or at the scale, that we're seeing this happen at right now in real time. So I think people need to reconsider their identity and their self-worth. I think that people need to embrace talk therapy and counseling. I think people need to also, I don't know, I would say, and I don't want to sound like I'm anti-IA, I would say that people should also challenge it. I think that I have very mixed feelings about this. I try really hard not to be cynical, but I think that when we see companies that are extremely profitable, right? Huge companies that are laying off 30,000 or 60,000 people for AI, like, why are you're just doing this? Why? Because you're going to save money on your bottom line because your sheet's going to look good at the end of the year. So you can make, right? Like 4 million more dollars. Like, why? The cost benefit analysis to humanity and society, I don't think is weighing in favor of people. And so when I hear, people in the tech space talk about responsible AI and ethical AI and human-centric AI, I think we need to take a step back and think about it on a much broader scale about what is the actual cost? What is this actually going to cost us as society? Who's going to be left to buy products? What's going to happen to the consumer market if 300,000 people are out of jobs? You know, like it just seems strange to me. It's like, are people thinking about this like a chess game, or are you just thinking about your quarterly earnings report in 3 months so that it looks good for your shareholders? Like, to me, it seems really short sighted and unwise. And I've already heard stories about companies who laid off people and whatever they were trying to do with AI didn't work or backfired. And then they had to hire people back or they had to hire new employees. Like, and I think the larger issue, and I'm sorry if I'm going down a rabbit hole with AI, but the larger issue really is about Humans realizing how powerful our brains are. I've read a lot of studies in the last year about AI, and I think AI gets a lot more credit than it deserves. Like, the power of the human brain far exceeds what AI is capable of based on energy usage. So, the
Mhm.
human brain is capable of more, of doing more, and has a greater output with far less input. Like, that is how amazing our brains are. That's how efficient we are at processing and analyzing information. So, the environmental cost, and right, the other cost, like the detrimental impact on humans, the cost of using AI, I think in many respects far outweighs whatever kind of benefit people think that they're going to get or are seeing. And I'm not saying that applies consistently across the
Mhm.
board. Maybe for certain professions or jobs, like, I started looking at AI 2 years ago in healthcare, as a health law attorney. And of course, we know there's great benefits in documentation or earlier diagnosis or things like that. But more recently, we know about data centers and the environmental impact that AI is having. And that seems very concerning to me, very scary. The drain on water, and the electrical grid and all these other things, I think, is very concerning, and I don't think our infrastructure is prepared for that. And residents and consumers should not be eating the cost or suffering because of large companies that wanna save some money. I
Mm.
don't think that's equitable.
If you could, I guess, if these tech CEOs, if we could help them have a moment of clarity or give them some information that might help them see things a little bit differently about the cost benefit analysis, right? And the impact on human beings and the environment, what would you say that they need to be thinking about? What is the additional information, the perspective, the clarity that they need to start steering the ship in a different direction?
I would just say, I've heard some more discussion about it recently. I don't know, I think the phrase human-centric AI is kind of a paradox. I don't know that AI is very human-centric, or I don't think it is in many respects, but I think that the decision making should be around doing cost benefit analysis for humans in general. I think that placing all of this reliance and dependence and hope in AI to solve all of our problems and do our work for us and, just save money, if it's just for the sake of saving money and there's all these other harms that are emanating from using AI, it's an ethical issue. It's an ethical problem or a moral problem. That can't be fixed. That has to come from the decision makers. But if companies are continuing to do these things, I think, people have to challenge it. Either employees have to quit and say, I'm not going to take part of this, I'm not going to take part in it, or I'm not going to help work on something that's going to eliminate my job or alter, the value and art of my profession permanently. I think that, and I haven't seen the latest news, but I think I remember seeing that Anthropic's safety officer or somebody had a background in humanities. And I was like, oh, this is really great. I feel so hopeful about that. And I could be wrong, so don't quote me on this, but I don't know if she left or was fired or resigned recently or something like that, but we need to have people in those companies who are like an ethics officer, or somebody who is really full-time responsible in governance. And so, I'm pursuing an AI governance certificate because that's something I also want to help businesses do and support them. My husband's company that he works with has some exposure in this industry, and I saw comments from recent conferences in Ohio and different places where they're like, everybody, is talking about AI at these companies and talking about all the benefits, but almost no one talking about governance still. And it's like really a cart before the horse problem, right? That's like a Pandora's box. You can't undo that. And so the other thing, I don't want to get into politics necessarily, but and I know there's different reasons too, when the government started talking about, not having AI laws passed for 10 years or something like that, or
Mhm.
discouraging that, I could understand some points of why they would feel that way, but there's a lot of reasons why we should have it and why states might need to pass their own or feel like they have to regulate certain industries for it that I think are, very valid. But yeah, so going back to your original question, I think that companies that should be honestly a requirement. You need to have an ethics person, you need to have a governance person. There should be boxes that are checked, and you should do a cost benefit analysis on what is the impact on humans and probably honestly environmental resources.
Mhm.
It's very concerning.
It is. I will say I've been thinking a lot lately about the effects on our critical thinking skills, especially as
Mhm.
attorneys and knowledge workers, right? I will say I'm actually in the certificate program at Wharton right now called Neuroscience for Better Business Decisions.
Yes.
Super fascinating. And we had a case study due this week, and I found a research study. I read it and sat down to start typing up a case study. What I learned and the impact, and it was difficult. It was ever so subtly difficult, but I love to write, and I felt
Yes.
a friction and a challenge just ever so subtly that I had never felt before. In writing
Interesting.
a structured piece of writing, explaining, starting with an introduction, right? And then, this is what the technology is. This is how they structured the study, the inclusion criteria, exclusion criteria. And I found it challenging to draft a case study. And it made me think, okay, have I been relying on AI too much? Like, I prefer Claude. I love Claude. I've been using Claude over ChatGPT for quite some time now.
Mhm.
And I use it as a brainstorming partner and as kind of like a metacognition, instead of maybe I've been outsourcing my metacognition right to Claude saying, what am I missing?
Mhm.
Or based on what you know about me, what are my blind spots and how I'm thinking about this, right? So I use it as a brainstorming partner, but I also use it to help me edit my writing and to help me create structure in my writing. Because I know we've talked about this before. Like one of my ADHD things is that I just talk and I spew and I have all my different tangential ideas kind of coming out at once, and I'll spill those on a piece of paper, and then I have to go organize after,
Mhm.
right?
I'm the same
And
way.
yeah, yeah, and it's just right? So
It comes out of us very fast, and then we
it
have to
does,
go back
it
and
does, it does,
structure.
and so that's what I have found useful about AI, right? Helping me structure. But then when I needed to sit down and create that structure by myself, it was
Mhm.
challenging, and I was thinking even we, have a Tesla, and I was driving it the other day, and in commuting, I had been relying on self-drive for so long.
Okay.
And I was driving just around town the other day. And I don't know if maybe this is just because I'm somebody who's just like very like self-aware and in my head and I can just notice these tiny little subtle shifts. It felt, I don't want to say difficult because you'd like to think that driving a car is like riding a bike, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
It felt a little challenging. Like I felt like I had to focus more on the road, right? Like I had to focus on, okay, do I usually it's not like the autopilot that you're used to having when you're like driving around town and you just know which way to go. You know which
Mhm.
way to go to get to the Starbucks or the Target or the grocery store or whatever, right? And it felt like I was having to deliberately think about the turns that I took, right? Because, we say, oh, we get in the car and I don't know how I got home, or I just, my body just knows, my brain knows, I've driven this route so many times. And I was taking our cat to the vet, and I just felt like I had to do more. I was expending more cognitive effort as I was driving. And it made me think, oh my God, like 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now, with us using AI and using self driving cars and automation and
Mm.
outsourcing our cognitive capacity to
Yeah.
machines. I mean, there's already research coming out on how we are losing our critical thinking skills, our communication skills from interacting with technology so much. That's one thing that I see as alarming, right? In this cost benefit analysis. And I think people were finally like this conversation is starting to emerge in the zeitgeist, right? I know we were talking recently. I read this report that was released by the World Economic Forum and McKinsey Health Institute in January about brain health and brain skills and this kind of combined concept that they call brain capital or the brain economy. And essentially, the TLDR there of this report is them just saying, hey, we need to be investing in humans and our brain capital as much as we are investing in AI right now. It's the social and economic imperative of the 21st century. And I'm just wondering, I'm having a moment of self awareness where I'm like, okay, I need to figure out how to better use AI so that I am not losing my creative thinking skills, my writing skills, my ability to structure thought, right? So I'm wondering what experience you've had with using AI tools in your personal life and if you've noticed any of those like subtle shifts, maybe things that you've gotten better at, things that you've gotten worse at, and how you think AI should be used as a tool.
So I don't use AI almost at all still. I like am very
Oh, okay.
unwilling to adopt it.
Okay.
Because when I read a study that came out last fall, it's positive using AI is positively correlated with brain atrophy. So I refuse to use it. So the more you use it, the more your brain, it's just like a physical body muscle. The more that you use AI and become dependent on it, your brain, I don't know if it's all of it or certain parts of it, literally which is extremely
Yeah.
alarming. And so the big push from companies and I guess the government in certain respects, I mean, they can adopt it however they want, of course, and I understand the needs for that. But I think for people, that's also the other part of why companies need governance because they need to understand that, right? You don't want your employees losing the ability or forgetting how to do things, how to write things, how to think critically. That's way too important for any job. So, obviously, as lawyers, we are very strictly regulated on, using it. And in the early case studies that I was using it for, I still use it for brainstorming too, or I'll just like ask it random creative questions for feedback. That's about it. I literally do not use any apps. I don't automate work. I don't do anything else. I used it a couple times last year to verify initial research that I did for something, and the accuracy was like 60 some percent. It was terrible. And I was like, this is not reliable at all as a lawyer or for like any other job where, you're in charge of compliance or making serious decisions for a business. So maybe it's better, I don't know, but even if it is better, again, do we want to be so reliant or dependent on it that we lose our ability to do what our brains are so good at? We're so naturally good at that, and for me, I don't know that it's worth it, unless I can automate and delegate tasks that I absolutely don't wanna do or use it in an assistant capacity, which I have not figured out yet, but I'll just tell you, I'm not gonna be someone who's giving an AI agent full access to, like, my bank account or credit cards and have it do things for me. Because 'cause I've also read horror stories about that going wrong. They're funny. They're funny when I read it about other people, but if it was me, I would be very concerned, so I think there's still a lot of improvements that need to be made on those things. I don't know if they're fully trustworthy either, because they're trained on human behavior. So you know?
Yeah, this is definitely a conversation worth having. I think we need more conversation about the impacts of AI in the cultural zeitgeist, like regular people who use AI or don't use AI and how we feel about it and how it's landing with consumers, how it's landing with society at large, right? We definitely need more of these conversations in the zeitgeist. Now you and I could talk about this forever and we have for like hours
Mhm.
on end and our brains digress into all these different tangents, but I want to get back to this idea of clarity with you
Mhm.
and being in this liminal space. Can you share with me any limiting beliefs that you learned that you had about yourself or things that you understood about yourself that you later learned were not true or had changed, right? You talked earlier about this
Yeah.
quarter life crisis and I feel like I went through one of those too. Um, maybe am currently, right? I like to say this is clarity, not crisis. It might look like crisis on the
Yeah.
outside to other people. It might look like crisis to society, but I call it clarity. For me, a lot of it was overcoming some of the limiting beliefs I had about myself and my perception of the world to write my worldview. I'm curious when you were going through this process and in this liminal space, whether it be that quarter life crisis or the spiritual awakening that you were talking about, what were some beliefs that you thought to be true, whether it was so strong that it was just a conviction, you knew in your heart to be true, that you kind of maybe had an aha moment or kind of like a gradual understanding of, oh, maybe that's not the case, right?
I think there's a few. I would say the first one is that, I think when I was in law school, I thought about what it meant to be a lawyer, right? We know it's an honorable profession. We know it's prestigious, but we also know it's very corrupt and there's a lot of toxic aspects in the corporate workplace in general that for some reason have not changed for a very long time. But one of the limiting beliefs that I thought about, and it was reinforced because of other people's comments, was when you start thinking about what you want to pursue, or like if you're transitioning out of, regular practice into an in-house role or something else, people are very opinionated about like what you can and can't do. And there were people who would say, "Oh, well, if you do this or if you do something different, that would be a terrible waste." Or you'll never be able to practice in a big law firm again. And I'm like, I don't know that I ever want to go back to that. That's the whole, reason I thought about leaving in the first
Mhm.
place. Other people's opinions are very different and you don't have to accept those as factual. So, your life and your decisions and how you feel aren't necessarily going to match up with other people. But I think the first limiting belief would be you don't need to continue doing something the same way just because you've invested a certain amount of time in it already. Right? Like, I forget what that's called. I think that's a
Sunk cost.
psychological term.
Yeah, the sunk cost fallacy. Yeah.
Yes, yes. So it's like that's the whole thing with the train. If you get
Yeah.
on the train, you can't say, "Well, I've already been on the train for an hour, so if I miss my stop, it's not a big deal." It's like it kind of is. You need to get off so you don't get lost.
Yeah, that's a Japanese proverb. That's what I've been thinking about lately is I think I saw it on LinkedIn. Someone shared if you hop on the wrong train,
Yeah.
it's like a Japanese proverb that's like if you hop on the wrong train, just get off at the nearest stop because the return trip is going to be so much more expensive. So I yeah, no, I resonate with that first limiting belief and you had a second one in mind.
So I think that's one of it is, yeah, the limiting belief about just because you've been doing something a certain way or you're in a position for a long time doesn't mean that like you're going to lose the time invested because you pivot or you transfer your skills to something else. Like, doesn't mean you stop being a lawyer, you stop doing something or whatever. Yeah, I think what you make of it is like totally your decision and you shouldn't feel limited by that. I'm trying to think about what the other thought was. Oh, limiting beliefs. So I think one of the other limiting beliefs I had, so as well as anybody else in Big Law, we make really good money. Like you make really good money as an attorney in general once you've been practicing for so long. But this kind of reminds me of what I brought up earlier in the conversation about talking with colleagues or mentors or right people who are a little bit further ahead in their career saying, this is it. I've made it. I don't need to do anything else, or I don't want to do anything else with my job or career goals. And again, no judgment. Everybody has different motives and reasons, or maybe they just want to do the same thing over and over and coast. But the limiting belief that I had was this will probably, and I think I thought this when I was younger, right? When you have more exposure and talk to different people, then you learn about what does success mean to different people? Totally different things. What does being wealthy mean to different people? Totally different things.
Mhm.
And I always thought when I was starting out was, oh, I'll never be able to find a job making this much money, right? Like the profitability potential. And then the more I read about, right, lawyers who started their own businesses or became entrepreneurs or did different things became wildly more successful, right? Or they went into publishing and media or wrote books, whatever it is, whatever. That too was like, it's not it's not the best that it will ever get. And I think that in your career, I don't think climbing the ladder, I mean, climbing the ladder might work for like older people, older generations where it was a more traditional path. But I just don't think the world works like that anymore, and I don't think that's true. So it would be like rethinking not really like a career ladder, it's more like lateral
Mhm.
moves, pivots. So for me, it was like this is how I'll describe it. It's like a visual. I had to leave where I was because to get clarity on what I needed to do, it's like climbing a mountain. You have to get to a different vantage point to see your path. You can't do it just by going through the motions and continuing on the path that you're on. You have to remove yourself from the situation, change your vantage point, and become almost a third party observer to your own life to realize where you need to actually be or how you're going to get there or the best way to do it.
Wow. Okay.
That's been true for me,
Okay.
right?
In doing that
So,
thought exercise with yourself, where did you ascend to on that mountain before you felt like you could look at your life from this kind of outside looking in, third party perspective? What did you see? Were you happy with what you saw? I mean, because sometimes clarity, I mean, we talk about clarity as if it's this beautiful aha moment and oh, I just
yeah.
knew and I'm just, I'm following my passion and I realized I'm a social entrepreneur. I realized it can just kind of sound, beautiful and magical and, oh, we want to do the work that lights us up, but it's also very messy. It comes with grief sometimes and realizing that
Oh,
maybe
yeah.
the path that you
Yeah.
chose you've outgrown, or maybe that's not who you are anymore. Maybe the person who chose that path 10 years ago is not the same person today,
Yeah.
right? So, walk me through you ascending this mountain and kind of taking this third party view on your life and what you saw and how you felt when you saw it.
Mhm. Yeah, this is really deep. This is really deep. So there's a lot to unpack here. So, first, I would say I think the clarity for me, the first point of clarity in realizing that this wasn't good or healthy is like the productivity paradox. So, I feel like I bought into a lie that the harder you work, the more productive or successful you'll be. And I think that's a lie. I think that's a lie. I think for me personally, again, I think that just wore me out, didn't enjoy the work anymore, didn't have enough creativity, which I need in, my work pursuits and in my life, right? To like fill my cup. So the productivity paradox, and again, this is different for everybody. This is where knowing yourself is important. So what is your circadian rhythm? What is your energy like? How do you work best? So part of this could be like your habits. Like, what are the habits and routines that you have? How do you need to change them? What does your work environment need to be like? But the productivity paradox is that concept that working more hours doesn't just mean that you'll be more successful or do a better job or produce more. And I spent some time recently reading, and I'll probably write this in my next Substack post and share some resources. Is I read about really successful people who were creative that worked in really non-traditional ways, like people who would go on vacation to a remote place and by themselves and just like work somewhere for a week because they had a different change of scenery or traveling to a new place. So I am like that. I seek novelty and stimulation. I love talking to strangers and meeting new people. I love experiencing something new for the first time. And honestly, like I don't like to over plan when I travel. So that concept of getting lost is exciting, finding things on your own without having a very rigid plan.
Mhm.
But anyways, I've digressed a little bit. So, but knowing, right, what motivates you and what gets your brain in like its best peak place. And then also some of the other people I read about that were successful would work like very unusual schedules. Like they would work 2 hours in the morning and 2 hours in the afternoon. Or maybe they worked a 4 hour block, or maybe they would work very late and that's all they would do. Maybe they worked 5 to 9 p.m. And I'm like all about that because if you figure out how you work best and then you can maximize your time to get more enjoyment out of life or spend more time with family or take better care of your health, you should absolutely do it. Like the 9 to 5 concept needs to die, like needs to die and go away.
Mm.
So
I'm here for
I don't
that.
want to,
I agree with that
I don't,
100%.
I don't want to, want to spoil my next post, but essentially,
Yeah.
the 9 to 5 is just it's a very outdated concept for a few reasons.
Yeah,
And
I've
then what was the other thing we were talking about before that?
oh my gosh, this is just so demonstrative of our brains right now. Oh, did you remember?
Yes. Okay. So the grief thing,
The
going back to the
grief.
grief thing.
Oh
Okay.
my gosh, yes.
So,
Just yeah, all
yeah.
the messy feelings that actually come with clarity. Like clarity is not always beautiful.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. So figuring out how you work, knowing what your schedule and your patterns and habits are like, and those require work. Like I'm still figuring that out. Like, what is my ideal day schedule? I'm working on that. I'm getting closer to figuring that out. Anyways, the grief part that you mentioned is so true because I went through that. I had to go to talk therapy. I had to walk through it's very strange to, like, try to describe it, but it's like you're putting that part of yourself or that version of yourself away. You're putting it away. Maybe you'll need it again later in life. Maybe you'll be different later in life and be like, "Oh, I could go back to this work environment, and it would be very different." I don't know, but maybe never, and that's okay, but I did feel in, like, some kind of sense like a process or form of grief, but not really in a bad way, more like it was more like I was sad that I settled for that
Mhm.
and tolerated it, right? To me, when I, like, really worked through it and reflected, I thought, "That just makes me feel like there are way too many people with a lack of self-respect."
Yeah. Yeah.
That's that was my takeaway, and I was like,
Yeah.
"That's very sad."
It is. It is
Right?
very sad. I mean, self-respect, going back to the concept of self-compassion, right? I think
Mhm,
we're just not taught and not raised to even know what that means. I didn't even learn what self-compassion was until I was probably like in my early 20s, right? I've never even heard those words strung together.
mhm.
And something that I've been thinking about a lot lately is how words create our world. I mean, quite literally, we were talking about limiting beliefs earlier. The stories that we tell ourselves, the limiting beliefs that we have, the words that we use to describe ourselves and our stories and who we are in this world, it creates our reality. And if we're using, I don't want to say the objectively the wrong words, but if we're using the wrong words, you can kind of cage yourself
Mhm.
mentally. And even if you have the key or the door, there's a door there. And I just feel like sometimes people are just like holding the door shut, right? Like mentally. Like I think of this like bird, say a bird cage, right? And you're just a bird in this cage and there's a door and it's just closed. It's not locked or latched, it's just closed. And you think that you don't have the capacity or the capability to fling it open, right?
Mhm.
And words, I mean, just kind of using that as a metaphor, but I've just been dwelling on this idea. I mean, leave it to an attorney to be like obsessed with words, especially like a healthcare regulatory attorney. But words matter. They create our world, they create reality. And so I'm wondering if there's a word, a string of words, a quote. It can be cheesy, it can be something as simple as like live, laugh, love that you actually internalized and chose to live by. Are there words that you have internalized that govern how you show up in the world every single day?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, you know this about me because I subscribe to stoicism.
Mhm.
And again, this is not like I don't think it's not morbid per se, but I like the quote that Marcus Aurelius says. Well, there's two, and they kind of go together. Is love the hand that fate deals you, and play it as your own. So we can't control all the circumstances of our life, but we can choose how we respond to it. Right? That's a character and integrity thing. And we can also, right, make the best or the most of any situation, right, that we feel has happened to us, that we don't have as much agency on. So you can choose how you respond. You can choose your attitude. You can frame the same situation, even if it's the worst thing possible that you could imagine, and it's unexpected and it throws you off kilter. You can choose how to respond. You can choose how to respond 10 out of 10 times. And you can also choose something meaningful to do with that or in response to that, right? I also heard something similar, and I don't remember who said this, but it was something like, if something bad happens to you in a day and it's 10 seconds of your day, don't let the 10 seconds ruin the other 40,000 seconds of your day. And I was like, that's a really, whatever. I'm not doing math because I don't do math, but
Yeah.
it's like that concept. So it's similar. And then the other thing that Marcus Aurelius said is, imagine that you have died. Imagine that you died and now live the rest of your life the way that you should
Mhm.
and make the most of it.
Wow.
Right? And I also, this is, we could talk about this another time, but really good illustration of that is watch a documentary about people who have died and been brought back. NDEs, that's like one of my weird side interests that I'm really interested in. I like watching documentaries or people who talk about dying and being brought back. They all say that. I completely changed how I lived. I completely reconsidered how I spent my time. It
Wow.
changed their perspective. But I think, again, metacognition, the power of the brain, I think we have the ability to do that without having a near death experience.
Mhm. Mhm.
It's hard, but I think we can do it. We're capable of that.
Absolutely. Okay, so this brings me back what you just said to earlier when you were talking about radical acceptance of our mortality. So, can you talk to me more about your radical acceptance? Have you gotten there? Have you accepted your own mortality? And I know, you're a Christian, right? How does that play in with your spirituality and your understanding of an afterlife? And what
Mhm.
clarity have you gained kind of in this spiritual awakening that you're going through and this radical acceptance of death?
Yeah. Yeah, this is such a powerful topic to think about this. I think um probably in society in general and definitely in American culture, we're very obsessed with youth. And then, now also longevity has become like almost like a fad industry that people are getting into. I think for me, spiritually as a person, um, I think that mortality is something that people need to come to terms with sooner. When you have an acceptance that, you're gonna die someday, as a person, you can choose to live consciously every single day and be grateful. So gratitude is its own thing. And I practice gratitude every single day. And it's a very good place to be in mentally. So this is the other part of biblical teachings, probably across different religions, is that the neural pathway of gratitude doesn't allow you to be anxious. So when the Bible says give thanks always in all circumstances, it's like it's a neural cognitive hack, because if you are practicing gratitude, you can't be anxious or worry about the future. Right? So that's like an amazing tool, and we can do it whenever we want to. So, but you also have to practice a habit to establish, resetting those neural pathways.
Mhm.
So I try to do that. But I accept that, I'll die whenever I die, and that's what it is. But I want to make the most of my life. I want to do something meaningful. I try to treat everybody in my life with, the respect and the love and kindness that they deserve as human beings. I don't know. I think there was an exercise once that I came across that was talking about, like, how do you want people to talk about you after you're gone? What do you want, what would you want your obituary or your headstone to say about you if you have that? And it's not about like being important or caring what other people think, but it's like, what really matters to you or what's going to matter after you're gone. And so having my faith is grounding because I don't live with a sense of fear and I don't make decisions out of fear. Having a belief in the afterlife helps you go through the worst and most difficult of situations in life. And I want everyone to be able to have that kind of peace and security and stability in their life, because there's nothing, you can't put a price on it, and there's nothing that will replace that. People that go through dark times and feel hopeless or don't have that sense of, eternity, or like they're going to live on, I think is that seems sad and it seems scary to me. And so, I think it's done that for me. that in our profession, for lawyers at least, mental health, substance dependency, and suicide is very high. I heard about some of those examples at one of the law firms that I worked at, and it was like a very taboo, don't talk about this topic.
Mm,
And it just made me incredibly sad because that's not something we should sweep under the rug. And it's not something that we should, avoid talking about and dealing with. But, my husband, I'm just going to tie this into my faith. I've been with my husband for, over 17 years now, and he's 20 years out from having a double lung transplant. He's had a few near death experiences, which I wasn't expecting, obviously, at any point in our relationship. And um, I just think being grounded in faith is is so valuable. It just gives you huge peace of mind, and then you can wake up every single day like it's a brand new life.
mhm,
You know that the world is filled with opportunity, and as Christians, we believe that God has an ultimate and great plan for each of us, but we may not know what that is until after we die. People who have died and come back say that almost all of them describe going through a life review,
mm,
which is really fascinating to me, where they're greeted by, like, someone that they knew, like a family member or a being that just emanates a sense of love, and that they go through a life review where they are forced to look at the things that they did, the things that they didn't do, and how they made other people feel based on their actions, and I think that's really powerful.
wow. That is so powerful. I think it would be powerful to do that exercise while you're living. I mean, right? Like you were
Yeah.
talking about what you would want inscribed, on your headstone, right? I mean, taking a
Yep.
moment to reflect on the impact that you've had in people's lives, whether it be positive or negative, and with every person that you crossed paths with, were you kind, right? And I wanna dwell on gratitude for a second. That's what I'm holding on to because I also like to practice gratitude, and I understand that neural pathway that you're talking about, and for
Mhm.
somebody who struggles with anxiety, gratitude is just one way that I like to be grateful for the life that I have, but I like to give moments of gratitude to
Yes.
other people. Like, that's what's exciting about gratitude to me is being able to text somebody or write a thank you note that's genuine, like, "Hey,
Yes.
appreciated you showing up for me and you didn't have to and that people don't have to show up for one another. I just appreciate you being a kind human being." Just taking moments to express gratitude are so important. How do you actually build that practice? You said you practice it every day. Like, how do you build that into your daily life? I've heard a gratitude practice can be sitting down at the end of the day and writing down three things that you're grateful for today, right? And that's one way to do it,
Mhm.
right? That's one way to journal and to reflect and to create a moment of stillness and find
Mhm.
clarity and practice gratitude. What other ways in your life do you practice gratitude that maybe feels a little bit more, I don't want to say like tangible, meaningful, aside from just like sitting down and maybe jotting down a few things that you're actually grateful for?
Yeah, that's such a good point. I'm glad you brought up practicing gratitude as a way to express thanks to other people.
Mhm.
I think that's really important. I think we should do that more because people need to feel valued and appreciated. And also, I think that like another practice is just being generous with your time, with your resources, not even just money, but like in kind resources too. I think gratitude for me in a big way is paying it forward. So, I talk about this a lot. Like, I'm a first generation attorney in my family, which I'm incredibly proud of. My mom was the first person, to go to college and get multiple degrees as a professional. And so I made it a big part of my practice working at larger law firms for years to, mentor other students, mentor summer associates, work with them on projects, especially if they were also first generation like myself, or if they had like come to me because I had at least one person say, I didn't feel like I would fit in. I didn't feel like I would have a sense of collegiality. And I don't know why they felt that way, but they wrote me thank you notes about making them feel like part of the group and the team, or just like how, kindness was shown to them in a way. So I like paying it forward in general. And I like doing things I don't know why, I like doing things for strangers, like, if somebody drops something, pick it up, open the door for people. They don't have to just, be older than you or look frail, but, like, just do nice things for people because I always do that with the intention that they will do something for someone else or pass it on. And then the other thing, this is much harder, is giving people the benefit of the doubt. Being grateful and expressing gratitude is a practice for your mindset, and your attitude is, if you're just like in your routine, and I always talk about traffic, everybody gets annoyed and frustrated with traffic, but if somebody is nice to you, oh my gosh, wave at them, smile, do something, like acknowledge it. Don't just ignore it. Like if you're zip filing or someone's letting you in from an on ramp. But I feel like those things really matter. Being courteous and also acknowledging when other people do things like that for you.
Yeah, I love that the mindset, that gratitude is a mindset. And being generous. I heard it called the GIB, the most generous interpretation
Hmm.
of behavior. So, affording strangers or anyone that you cross paths with in life the most generous interpretation of their behavior, the GIB, right? If they are rude or short or curt or someone cuts you off on the highway, right? Or someone's going 20 and a 40 and you're impatient, right? And affording them, oh, well, maybe they're cutting me off because they have a pregnant wife in the passenger seat that they need to get to the hospital, right? Or
Right.
or maybe they're going 20 and
Right.
a 40 because they have a huge birthday cake on the passenger seat, right? Something like that, right? So just affording strangers the most generous interpretation of behavior not
Yeah.
only allows you to practice this gratitude and kindness and paying it forward to humanity, to people that you cross paths with, but also it's it's amazing for I mean, for yourself, right? For your
Yes.
own mindset to just operate with this
Yeah.
a kinder lens towards other people in the world, right? No one's out to get you, no one's cutting you off because they have road rage or they're feeling something personal towards you, and the world isn't out to get you, and just kind of, yeah, I mean, adopting the mindset of the give is something that I have found really impactful for, creating this kind of attitude of gratitude, you know, as they say, which is a platitude in and of itself. Adopt an attitude of gratitude. But I mean,
Mhm.
this is the work of how to do that, right? And the
Mhm.
different ways to do that. I wanted to ask you too. So, Kindred Horizon, your newsletter, which I'm
Mhm.
excited to see more of on Substack, um, you talk about refining being your word for 2026. So, what does the word refining mean? And what does it mean to you and how you're applying it to your life this year?
Yeah, so refining, I would say, I'll talk about the duality of the word refining for me. So first, um, again, I'll tie the foundational concept back to my faith. So, and this is why I love dissecting the Bible and the stories and symbolism, especially from the cultural standpoint and the time in which they were written. I have an archaeology Bible. It is the coolest thing ever, and I can't imagine reading anything else. But one of the examples in the Bible, and this is in if you've heard the Christmas choir line about the refiner's fire and Handel's Messiah,
I haven't.
or in
Tell me
any
more.
other. Yeah. So in the Bible, in the Old Testament, there's, and I'm going to misquote this because I don't memorize things, but one of the concepts is that God holds us in the palm of his hand like a refiner, like a silversmith. And I remember looking this up last year and thinking, what does that actually mean? Does that mean we're just going to go through terrible experiences? Does that mean we're going to be tested? Does that mean we're going to have to suffer? And the short answer is yes, but that's not all of it. And that's not why it's significant. So, when you go through the process of refining as a person, and from the spiritual standpoint, it means you are put or held in a specific place for a certain amount of time until God or the divine creator knows that we're done. We're done. We're complete. We're perfect. And when a silversmith refines silver, he holds the silver until it's completely pure and he can see his own reflection. And I thought that was so powerful,
Wow.
right? So it has to be hot enough, it burns away the other metals or the other impurities or whatever, and then it gets to a point where it's so pure and it's strong and obviously has high value, right? That's when you know that whatever you've gone through in life, you've reached that point of finality or completion in whatever you've gone through. And I think everybody goes through periods like that in your life. And that's why, resilience is important. So for me, refining on a personal level has a lot more to do with my habits. So as an ADHD person, decluttering my environment, getting rid of things that I don't use or need anymore, which is also, an act of generosity. Like, even if you want to keep it, you're like, I don't need it and it's taking up space. So, decluttering. And then also refining means, either establishing or improving your habits and routines. And so that's what I'm going through right now in my liminal space is trying to reset my daily habit or my weekly schedule of how I spend my time. And can I get that to a point where I'm using my time well, I'm not wasting time, but I'm also not focusing all of my time on like working or just being productive. Right? So it's like allocating different amounts of time in your day or week to different things. Like I am trying to focus resting more on the weekend or carving out specific time with my spouse or my family. But then also for me, how much time do I need on my own? How much quiet time do I need to recharge or do something creative on my own time? And just trying to keep all of that in balance. And then refining, right, for your career, long term as a person goes back to the self actualization piece. So, am I using all of my gifts and abilities as a person? Where can I improve? I believe, like have talked about too, in lifelong learning, self improvement. I'm not going to ever reach a point where I feel like I don't need to learn anymore or I don't need to learn new skills or, how can I become better as a person in general? And so I'm sure that will change over time. So my refining, going through different trials, right, in my family and with, my own health and different things, I think it's just all a process. It's just continuing. Sometimes you have a lot going on at the same time. Yeah. And so I don't know when will I ever feel like I'm perfect or complete or done doing something? Probably not.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering. I mean, are humans are we supposed to get to this place where this destination where we think we've finally got it figured out, we're perfect. We can see our own reflection in this ball of silver, right? Or is the meaning that we find in life more about just the journey and the process of getting there, right? Through the suffering and the joys and the being on fire and being a molten piece of silver, right? Like, is
Mhm.
that the thing, right?
It's the
It's the
journey.
journey,
It's the
right? It's the
journey.
journey.
Yes,
Yeah,
it's the journey.
I love
When
that.
I was class president of my high school, and that was my graduation speech, was actually talking about Homer's Odyssey and the journey, and so I still believe that. I still believe it's about the journey. So, when I look back on my life, I want my life to be like a colorful patchwork quilt or a tapestry. It's not gonna be linear. It's not gonna be a gradient of one color. It's gonna be more colorful
I
and
love
more
that.
vibrant.
I love that.
And complex.
And complex. Yes, yes. Life is
Yeah.
complex. Humans are complex.
Mhm.
Okay, I'll save this last question for you, and this is how I hope to close every episode. And this is what I kind of want to be a tradition for Lucid Commons because I think moments of clarity that I have gained throughout my life and through this messy middle that I've been going through is through the generosity of and empathy of other human beings, of you
Mhm.
and our friendship and other people in my life who maybe just said something that I hung on to or that meant a lot to me, or they saw something in me that I didn't see, or they said something in passing that maybe was flippant for them that just I mean changed the perception that I had of myself, or maybe eliminated a limiting belief I had about myself or the world, right? And
Mhm.
people and humans and just having these moments of connection and giving these moments of clarity to each other is super important and impactful. I mean, truly, for me, it has been. So I want you to imagine a person that you've met in your life. It can be a stranger. You know, you said you like to talk to strangers, right? So a stranger that you
Right?
met at the grocery store that you cross paths with walking into work, or a colleague or a family member, somebody who's close to you, a loved one. And imagine that person and some interaction or some exchange that you had with them, and finish the sentence, because I knew you. Right, and if you know, like, if you've seen Wicked, right, the line is, "I have been
Mhm,
changed for good." So if you
mhm.
can think of someone that you've met in your life that changed who you are or how you see the world, think of that person, and what was that moment, and what would you say to that person?
Oh, wow, this is so hard. There's so many examples I could give. I would just say this is gonna be so hard for me to talk about. Yeah. I mean, so growing up, I think my grandmother's made the biggest impact on my life, but when I was younger, one of the things that I prayed for to God, and this is like I'll laugh about this because you have to be careful what you ask for, but I prayed, I never really asked for anything specific when I prayed, but I just said don't give me a normal life because I didn't want a boring life,
Mm.
which has turned out to be true. This turned out to be true, but not in bad ways, in good ways. It's made my life really interesting, but I would say I met one of the Holocaust survivors, Gerda Weissman Klein, when I was in undergraduate school, and I got to meet her. And she shared some thoughts about, you know, that tragic experience of her life and loss, and then how she met her husband and fell in love and moved back to the United States with one of the soldiers that she met and had a family. And she talked about, I think, what her most cherished memories were. And I think it's what a lot of us I would say probably take for granted. But she said, that her favorite memories of life were the quiet nights at home. And I think a lot of people, especially in our culture, talk about like being bored or being restless or being at home. And I would say probably maybe just taking for granted their good health, right? Or when things in their life were stable and nothing was going wrong. And I think I've reflected on that recently too, because after you go through like a health situation or a loss of someone or something else like that happening in your life, you realize how long, right? How long of a period you had in your life before that happened. You didn't know when it would happen. You didn't know what it would be like going through it or afterwards. But I would say I have come to appreciate and not take for granted like the boring nights at home or like the boring days or uneventful time periods or when people are in good health or when you're in good health because of her saying that. That was a really good realization. And it's just a difference of perspective,
Wow.
but something and obviously that was to a lot of college students, but other people that were in attendance as well. But I think that I mean, I guess I still consider myself to be young-ish. I'm getting towards middle age, you know, in the next decade, but I think that's something that all people should think about, but especially younger people, is don't take for granted your good health or times when you have grandparents or extended family in your life. Like, make the most of that and spend time with them. And don't ever think because your life is uneventful that it's just boring
Mhm.
because, you know, you haven't experienced loss or tragedy or a health crisis. And I think that people should remember that.
Hmm.
And I think her story was, yeah, of course, so powerful and good for everyone to hear someone who'd been through those things say something like that.
I love that.
Gratitude,
Gratitude. Are you
gratitude.
enjoying your quiet nights at home?
Yes. Oh my gosh, so much. It's so good. And I'm like, this is part of the problem now is because I've gotten to such a good place with changing my schedule and my routine. I'm like, I'm enjoying it too much, I think. And I told my husband that the other day. I think I'm enjoying it too much,
Yeah.
but I honestly think it's what I need. I've been making it a point to go outside at night when the weather's nice, and I'll just make a fire and just sit outside by the woods by my house
I love
and
that.
just read or listen to music, and
Yeah.
it's so enjoyable. And you're right, like, what you were talking about earlier is people going through tough times or raising kids or taking care of family members, maybe they don't get nights like that, and I hope they do at some other point in their life where they can find quiet time away for themselves, but, like, you have to make time for it, and I just realized that, like, if I don't do that, I'm probably gonna spend time in my house, and I think being outside in nature, being, outside in the elements is something that we all need, and I think we've gotten away from that, so the whole thing about touching grass or spending time in the woods or gardening, touching plants, yeah, it's definitely true, I think it's good for the soul.
Mhm. So good for the soul. Well, thank you for sharing that. I know that took you to a deep place, so thank you. Thank you
Yeah,
for that.
you're welcome.
All right, Ari Lester, we're wrapping up. We're coming up on 2 hours. I know we set out just to do like 60 to 90. So I'm so happy that we had like such a rich conversation. I want to thank
Me
you. I
too.
want to thank you for being my first guest and for believing in me
Yeah.
and brainstorming with me and just yeah, and just being part of my journey and part of my path. So thank you for being on Lucid Commons.